Hey guys, I'm Chris Buck and a very warm welcome to Friday Fretworks, and this week we're taking a look at this rather incredible Fender Super from 1955. Now, if someone says the words Fender Super, odds on you will want to follow it with the word reverb. It's near enough a reflex action at this point for guitar players. However, not many people know that the Fender Super actually has its origins way back in 1947. Just for context, just 2 years after the end of the war, and some 3 years before Fender actually introduced themselves to the world of guitar making in 1950 with the Fender Esquire. Now, the Super actually has its origins in a short-lived amplifier called the Dual Professional that Fender introduced in 1947. Early 1947. It's unique for a couple of different reasons. Principally the V-shaped wedge cab, a chrome protective strip that ran down the length of the grille cloth to protect the speakers, and lastly the fact that it was the first commercially produced amplifier to utilise twin speakers. Now, later in 1947, the Dual Professional was rebranded as the Super, and thus creating arguably one of Fender's most iconic amplifiers. The next evolution of the Super saw the introduction of what we now think of as the TV front, in essence a wider panel cabinet that was vaguely reminiscent of a TV set. However, it was in 1955 that the biggest changes came into force with the introduction of the new narrow panel cab, as with today's example, also a 2 EQ knob control as opposed to the singular tone control that you had on earlier iterations. Also, Fender bumped up the output of the amp from 18 watts to roughly 28. It's important to remember that as much as we're huge fans of these lower wattage amps today for the way that they break up very early or relatively achievable volumes, it's important to remember that back in 1955 this was really not the case. It was a case of looking for clarity and headroom for musicians to be able to stand out in a mix, primarily on bandstands where they were using these amplifiers. So any kind of harmonically rich, great sound of distortion that you get from these amps at low volume is entirely happy coincidence. That said, this 55 Super is one of the most incredibly dynamic amplifiers I've ever played. It obviously cleans up beautifully with the use of your guitar's volume control, but hopefully, as this next clip will show, just playing slightly differently or digging in slightly harder or less with your picking hand will yield incredibly different results. It really is remarkable in that respect. It's also worth mentioning that for today's video I'm using the Universal Audio aux running into the aux's amp using a 1x12 Tweed cab emulation with a 15 watt Celestian Blue. To my ears at least, this gets me closest to the speaker which is actually in this cab, or one of them at least. Also using a touch of plate reverb. Sounds a little bit like this. It's also interesting to see that the Super actually has two different sets of inputs. You've got the microphone input as well as the instrument input. Now, it's been tough to choose a favourite, to be honest. I would say that the mic input is marginally smoother, whereas the instrument, again, all in the name of clarity and headroom, is a little bit brighter and maybe arguably a little bit more dynamic. Switching between the two with my 335 sounds a little bit like this. In 1960, Fender changed the design of the Super again when they moved over to the new brown face series of amplifiers, the Super now including a vibrato channel, aka the fabled harmonic tremolo, as well as upping the output to a bigger 40 watts. However, it wasn't until 1963 that the Super Reverb finally came into effect with its 4x10 setup, having been used by Stevie Ray Vaughan to Johnny Marr to Derek Trucks to Jimmy Page over the years, arguably becoming one of Fender's most kind of iconic amplifiers. I'm going to leave you with one final clip on the Super. Honestly, I've been absolutely floored by this amp. It's been a real revelation in terms of just getting an amp to the point of breakup and then using your guitar's volume control to control everything from there. It's been a lesson in how dynamic and how wonderfully responsive these amps truly can be. Thank you very much to Ed for the loan of this incredible piece of history. As ever, I'm Chris Buck. You're watching Friday Fretworks. Please subscribe, hit the bell icon if you haven't already. And I shall see you next week for another episode of Friday Fretworks. Cheers guys, take care, see you soon.